Southern writer.
Mm-hmm.
You clearly come from a great tradition, but do you embrace that, or do you reject that characterization?
Well, I was giving out an assignment in my upper level workshop the other day, and I wanted my students to go out and do folklore field work, just go out and talk to people, gather stories, and then write poetry based on the folklore material they gathered. And so I got to looking at my book because I wanted to be able to say something to them about how field work has helped me as a poet. And I think I came up with some number like, out of 39 poems in the book, like 21 of them have stuff I got from doing field work in them. And I did that field work in the Mississippi Delta, mostly on the Arkansas side. So it's, I think it's fair to talk about me as a Southern poet because so much of the South does kind of come into the poetry. But I'm fine with that. I mean, it's just kind of an accurate description of the work I've published to date. But I don't like it if it comes with a certain set of expectations that every Southern writer is supposed to fulfill. That I think that you can say somebody's a Southern writer, but let him do Southern writing his own way. And it's kind of like I used to play in bands, like rock bands, blues bands, and I play harmonica, but I would stop short of playing harmonica, especially in the rock bands, except on a few songs, because I didn't want our band to be thought of as that harmonica band, and you can only do one thing or people are mad. I wouldn't want people to think, well, if Greg's not writing about a cockfight, then I just don't want to look at it, Teresa?
I noticed that you had the person that you had interviewed or studied be the speaker. Is that generally what you do in the poems that come from an interview, is let the person you've interviewed be the speaker?
It happens all kind of ways. I do that a fair amount of the time because I like voices. I like putting on voices. And I enjoy working in the kind of dramatic mode. And so there's a whole section in Gust, for example, called Becoming Hot Tamale Charlie, in which, from start to finish, the speaker is an Italian agricultural worker who had come to Arkansas at the turn of the 20th century. He's talking, and it's not Greg. It's clearly, it's clearly the voice of an Italian Arkansan. So, I do that a lot, but I don't always let the person I interviewed be the speaker in the poem. It just depends on what's best for that particular poem, I think.
How old were you when you first started to write?
Probably about I guess probably about 8, because I started writing Southern gospel songs about that time, and then some poetry. I didn't really come from a very readerly family. I wasn't hearing a lot about poetry when I was growing up, and didn't really even have a clear idea of what it was. I knew about song, because there's a lot of music in my family and in the culture. But I just loved words from the time as far back as I can remember. And so I was always looking for ways to use certain words. So I was kind of writing before I was writing. Like I would just fall in love with some simple word. Like an example I use sometimes when people ask me this question is the word Swiss. I remember very clearly being obsessed with the word Swiss. I just liked it. And what I would do when I got obsessed with one of these words is use it all the time. And, the word Swiss doesn't come up just all that often in Pumpkin Bend, Arkansas. So it seemed a bit unnatural. So my mother would call me on it. She'd be like, "Oh, Greg, you're just looking for reasons to use the word Swiss." But so finally, I would pretend to be inventing companies, the product or service offered by which I had no interest in whatsoever. just so I could name something. And so I was always like naming things and trying to find things to name. But then somebody got me one of those Bartlett's books for mere quotations, or whatever it is, and I opened it up and it fell on the Shakespeare section, which it will do because that section is so big. And I didn't know anything about Shakespeare. I was not hearing about Shakespeare or anything. I mean, I guess I probably had heard the name, but I was just a little kid. And I was reading these little snippets in the Shakespeare section of Bartlett's, and I didn't know the stories, had no idea whatsoever of the context. But I knew that whoever had strung these words together had done so on a principle of delight and was taking joy in the words as like toys for the imagination. And I think it dawned on me at that point, like, oh, there's this thing, poetry, you can do if you like playing with words. You don't have to pretend to be starting companies that you have no intention whatsoever of actually starting. Marshall?
You mentioned song, and we talked about song and music. I was taken by the poem that mentioned the old gospel tune, Higher Ground.
Uh-huh.
And we've talked about, I grew up singing that song in church,
Mm-hmm.
but fascinated with how it plays and what it did in that poem. Table, as table.
Yeah, he misunderstands that a little bit, yeah.
Is that out of, from your
Yeah.
religious background? Was
I actually thought that. I knew about the like quail and manna and those Bible stories, and so I didn't understand what tableland meant. So when I heard that song as a little kid, I always thought that God was like setting tables out in the wilderness and folks were eating the heavenly food.
Tableland.
Yeah.
I don't know that song. So talk some more about that song. Or
Well,
sing it.
Marshall, would you like to sing?
I don't know that song.
I really don't know the song well enough to sing it. I mean, it wasn't a song that I heard just a whole lot. I mean, it wasn't one of our favorites, I think, in my church, but I went to a Pentecostal country church. But it was sung sometimes, and I always got that image of the table set in the woods. Heather?
How do you differentiate a bad from a good poem when you're writing?
When I'm writing it?
Yeah. Did you go through a phase where you wrote bad poetry, and then how do you still differentiate?
Oh, man. It is not easy for me. Sometimes you get a poem that just comes to you as kind of like manna. It's just there, it just falls down, and you didn't really have to work for it, and you write it in 15 minutes, and you have a good feeling about it. Like, this, I may need to polish this or something, or tweak it, or unpolish it if it's too polished, but I'm feeling good about it. And, you have those poems. And I don't question those too, though sometimes I look back at one of those gift poems, say 5 years after I wrote it, and think, it wasn't as much as a gift as I thought it was. But usually I end up feeling pretty good about those. But then there's another kind of poem that just is hard to write. And sometimes you're trying too hard and it just ain't gonna happen. But I think there's a meme that when you're feeling like you're trying, you just need to give up on it, that needs to be questioned and maybe challenged, because there have been